The boardroom was buzzing with laughter as the young CEO leaned back in his chair, his voice dripping with arrogance. "I don't hire old people," he declared, waving dismissively toward the hallway where Harold, the quiet janitor, passed by with his mop. The room erupted in snickers, executives exchanging smug looks as if the insult were entertainment. What none of them knew was that Harold wasn't just pushing a mop, he was also the silent investor keeping their company afloat. A man who had built, sold, and multiplied fortunes long before the CEO had even finished college. Tonight, in that same boardroom where he was mocked, Harold would make a decision that would shock them all. Because when arrogance collides with wisdom, the outcome is never what the arrogant expect. And soon, the very janitor they laughed at would reveal a truth powerful enough to bring the entire empire to its knees. Harold wiped the polished marble floors with quiet precision, blending into the background of the glittering corporate tower. To most of the staff, he was invisible. The young executive strutted past him in designer suits, barely acknowledging his existence except with the occasional impatient glance if his mop happened to cross their path. He didn't mind, not on the surface, at least. Years of choosing humility had taught him the power of silence. But silence had its limits. That evening, the CEO had gathered his inner circle for a high-profile pitch. Harold had been tidying nearby when he heard the words. "I don't hire old people," the CEO declared, smirking as if age itself were a weakness. The room filled with laughter, sycophants eager to echo their leader's disdain. Harold's grip on the mop tightened ever so slightly, though his face betrayed nothing. Inside the boardroom, the arrogance grew thicker. The CEO paced dramatically, gesturing toward a presentation slide that showcased bright graphs and bold predictions. "We are the future," he said proudly. "We don't need outdated ideas, and we certainly don't need outdated people slowing us down. Our brand is about innovation, youth, disruption." An executive chimed in, "That's right. Gray hair equals gray thinking. The world belongs to the new generation." More laughter followed. They didn't notice Harold pausing at the doorframe, his eyes calm but sharp, absorbing every word. "Can you imagine," another added, "someone like him trying to understand blockchain? Or AI? He probably thinks the cloud is just weather." The table erupted again, their mocking gazes flicking briefly toward Harold as if he were a living prop for their punchline. Harold turned slowly back to his mop, finishing his work with deliberate care. They saw an old man with worn shoes and calloused hands. What they didn't see was the man who had financed half the city's most promising startups, the one who had predicted market shifts years before they became headlines, the one who held in his portfolio the very connections they were desperate to court. The humiliation deepened. Later that night, during a corporate dinner hosted in the tower's glittering restaurant, the CEO spotted Harold clearing a table in the corner. Raising his glass, he called out loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Careful, everyone. Don't let the janitor spill soup on your suit. He's been around so long, I bet he thinks TikTok is just a clock that ticks." The crowd roared with laughter, some executives nearly choking on their wine. A few younger interns shifted uncomfortably, but no one dared oppose the CEO's cruelty. Harold bowed his head, collected the plates, and retreated quietly, his dignity intact. He didn't need to lash back, the seeds of their downfall were already sown. The mocking continued for days. Each time Harold entered a room, whispers trailed behind him. "Dinosaur," they snickered. "Relic." The CEO in particular made a sport of turning Harold into the butt of his jokes. In his speeches about innovation, he contrasted the janitor's age with the company's youth, as though Harold were the embodiment of everything they sought to reject. The climax of this humiliation came during a major investor showcase. Dozens of potential partners filled the lavish conference hall, champagne flutes in hand. The CEO strutted onto the stage in a tailored navy suit, his smile gleaming as cameras flashed. At the back of the room, Harold entered quietly, carrying a tray of glasses. To the investors, he was just part of the staff. To the CEO, he was an easy target. "Ladies and gentlemen," the CEO began, "welcome to the future of business. Our company thrives because we embrace what's new, what's fresh, what's young. We don't cling to outdated models or outdated people. In fact, his eyes landed cruelly on Harold. Around here, the only dinosaurs are the ones cleaning up after us. The audience chuckled politely, some uncomfortable, but most swayed by the CEO's confidence. Harold stood still, tray in hand, his eyes steady on the stage. He did not flinch. He did not frown. He simply waited, as if he knew the performance would eventually collapse under its own weight. The CEO, emboldened by the reaction, leaned further. "And that's why I'll never hire old people. This company is for the young, the sharp, the ones who understand tomorrow, not yesterday." He raised his glass to a room that erupted in applause. But beneath the surface, fault lines were forming. A few investors exchanged wary glances. Others whispered, disliking the overt ageism. They had built their fortunes by respecting wisdom as much as innovation, and they recognized arrogance when they saw it. Still, the CEO basked in the spotlight, unaware that his careless words had already lit the fuse of his downfall. And it would be Harold, the man he mocked most, who would strike the match that brought the empire crumbling down. Have you ever been written off just because of your age, your appearance, or your job title? That's what Harold is facing right now. The CEO and his team think he's nothing more than a janitor, a relic of the past. But what they don't realize is that Harold has the power to flip their world upside down. Before we see how this story unfolds, take a moment to subscribe. Join our community where we celebrate resilience, wisdom, and unexpected victories. Because the moment Harold reveals who he truly is, you won't want to miss the look on their faces. The lights dimmed in the vast conference hall, and all eyes fixed on the CEO as he strutted across the stage. He basked in the glow of attention, a man convinced of his own brilliance. But Harold, standing quietly at the back with his mop set aside, knew the time for silence was ending. As the CEO clicked to the next slide, showcasing inflated numbers and hollow promises, a group of investors murmured. Some frowned, uneasy with the arrogance dripping from every word. Harold noticed. He could read the tension as easily as others read a book. Years of boardroom battles had trained him to spot the cracks in a pitch long before they shattered. The CEO's voice boomed, "This company is the future. We leave the old world behind. Only the young understand innovation. Only the young can lead." He raised his glass again, repeating his mantra. The crowd applauded politely, though their claps rang hollow. At that moment, Harold stepped forward. Calm, deliberate, as if every movement carried weight. A few servers looked at him curiously, unsure why the janitor was walking into the spotlight. The CEO caught sight of him and smirked. "What is this?" he mocked. "Did we lose the help? Someone get him back to his bucket before he trips over a cable." Laughter rippled, though weaker this time. Harold didn't flinch. He placed the tray of glasses he carried onto the nearest table and turned to face the investors directly. His voice, though steady and measured, carried across the room with unexpected authority. "It's true," he began softly, "I don't belong here in your picture of youth and vanity. But let's talk about results. Let's talk about what sustains a company beyond slogans and buzzwords." The CEO frowned, irritated. "Excuse me? Who exactly do you think you are?" Harold held his gaze. Then, with a calm smile, he said, "I'm the one who signed the check that allowed your company to exist. And I'm the one who can just as easily take it away." The room fell silent. Forks clinked against plates. A dozen investors turned in their seats, eyes narrowing. The CEO blinked, then laughed nervously. "Oh, come on. This is absurd. You expect us to believe the janitor is some kind of hidden benefactor?" One of the senior investors spoke up. "Actually, I've heard the name Harold Whitman before. He was behind the seed funding for several firms I've worked with. Tech giants owe their start to him." He looked directly at Harold, recognition dawning. "You're him, aren't you?" Harold gave a slight nod. "I've always believed in letting talent speak for itself. But tonight, arrogance has spoken louder than ability. And arrogance," he added, glancing at the CEO, "is the fastest way to destroy everything you've built." A murmur swept through the room. Investors leaned forward, whispering urgently. Some even pulled out their phones, no doubt confirming Harold's identity. The CEO's confident grin faltered, his jaw tightening. The spotlight that had once glorified him now illuminated his insecurity. "You've been mocking me for days," Harold continued, his tone never rising. "Not because of my work, but because of my age." Yet it was these hands, he lifted his calloused palms, that built companies, guided leaders, and turned vision into reality. While you were still borrowing money from your parents, I was creating legacies. The CEO flushed red, stammering. "This is ridiculous. You can't just walk in here and undermine me." But Harold didn't need to undermine him. The CEO's own words had done that already. All Harold had to do was stand in the truth. And the truth, it seemed, was more powerful than any pitch deck the CEO could conjure. Gasps, murmurs, and scattered applause began to rise. The moment of reckoning was only just beginning. The conference hall buzzed with shock. Investors leaned forward in their seats, some whispering, others nodding as if puzzle pieces were finally falling into place. The man they had dismissed as a janitor was standing tall as a financier whose reputation stretched far beyond these glittering walls. For the first time that evening, the CEO looked small under the spotlight. Harold let the silence linger before continuing. "I've built empires," he said evenly. "And I've watched empires fall. Do you know what makes the difference? Respect. Respect for people, respect for experience, respect for the truth. Without it, money evaporates, investors vanish, and companies crumble." The CEO forced a laugh, desperate to reclaim control. "Don't be ridiculous. This is just some stunt. You think you can walk in here and embarrass me in front of my partners?" His eyes darted to the audience, searching for support. But instead of agreement, he was met with raised eyebrows and folded arms. One investor stood, her voice sharp. "We don't invest in arrogance. We invest in leaders. And right now, Harold is the only leader I see in this room." A wave of murmurs followed, several others nodding in agreement. Harold inclined his head graciously. "You don't need to see me as a leader. You just need to understand one thing. I won't be associated with an organization that mocks wisdom, that diminishes people for the years they've lived rather than the results they can deliver." The CEO's face turned crimson. "What are you saying?" Harold took a breath, his eyes steady. "I'm saying my investment ends tonight. Every dollar I've put into this company, over 100 million, is being withdrawn. Effective immediately." Gasps erupted around the room. The CEO staggered, gripping the edge of the podium as though the words themselves had knocked the wind from him. You can't do that. We need that capital to secure our next round, to expand our operations. You'll ruin us." Harold shook his head. "No. You did that yourself. I simply refuse to enable it any longer." A hush fell. Investors exchanged urgent whispers, some already pushing back from their chairs. Phones buzzed as financial alerts were checked and contracts reviewed. The foundation beneath the CEO's carefully crafted empire was dissolving right before his eyes. "You think anyone will back you now?" Harold asked quietly. "They've all seen who you are. You can charm with words, but character always reveals itself. And character is what builds trust, the currency stronger than any dollar." Applause broke out from the back, hesitant at first but quickly spreading. The CEO froze, watching as the room he thought he commanded now shifted allegiance. The very investors he had courted were shaking Harold's hand, introducing themselves, eager to align with the man who had just displayed calm authority in the face of cruelty. The CEO shouted over the noise, desperate. "This isn't fair. You can't just walk away in." "Life isn't about fair," Harold cut in gently. "It's about choices. And tonight, you've shown the world what kind of leader you are. I'm showing them what kind of man I am." For a long moment, their eyes locked, the brash youth against the seasoned elder. Then Harold turned away, not needing another word. The decision was made, and its impact irreversible. As Harold exited the hall, investors followed, eager to continue the conversation. The CEO was left alone on stage, the spotlight no longer a crown but a burden, illuminating not his power, but his downfall. And in that moment, the janitor who had been mocked as obsolete had become the architect of the company's reckoning. The boardroom, once a place of arrogance and dismissal, now sat in stunned silence. Harold's revelation had shattered the illusion. The CEO, once smug and untouchable, stood pale, his words failing him. He stammered, trying to claw back control, but his power had already evaporated. The staff, the board members, and the investors knew the truth. The janitor wasn't just a janitor. He was the very lifeline of their company. Harold gathered his folder, calm as ever, and looked at the faces around the table. "Age doesn't make you irrelevant," he said, voice steady. "Experience makes you valuable. Humility makes you wise. And arrogance," his gaze flicked back to the CEO, "makes you blind." The CEO opened his mouth to argue, but before he could, a member of the board leaned forward. "Mr. Thompson," she said to Harold, now addressing him with the respect he deserved, "if you withdraw your investment, the company collapses. But if you were willing to stay, with leadership you trust, things could change." Murmurs spread across the room. They weren't pleading with the CEO anymore. They were appealing directly to Harold. Harold studied them for a long moment. He wasn't interested in revenge, he wanted to teach a lesson that would last. "This company has potential," he said finally. "But it needs leaders who listen, who respect the people behind the titles. Until that changes, my money is better invested elsewhere." The CEO's face twisted in desperation. "You can't walk away from this. You need us as much as we need you." But Harold simply shook his head. "No. I built my fortune by recognizing value. And right now, you're the liability." With that, he rose from his seat and walked toward the door. Each step echoed, each one a nail in the coffin of the CEO's career. The staff exchanged glances, some filled with awe, others with quiet satisfaction. The janitor had spoken louder than any executive in the room. Outside the boardroom, whispers spread like wildfire. Employees who had overheard pieces of the confrontation carried the story down the halls. By the time Harold reached the lobby, word had already reached the receptionist, who smiled knowingly as he walked past. To them, Harold wasn't just a janitor anymore. He was proof that true power doesn't come from a title, but from integrity. Meanwhile, chaos erupted upstairs. The board called an emergency vote. The CEO was removed from his position within the hour, his reign of arrogance brought to an unceremonious end. His protests fell on deaf ears. He had burned his bridges in front of the very person who held the keys to their survival. Later that evening, Harold returned home. His modest apartment was quiet, but he felt a peace settle over him. He thought about the years of being overlooked, dismissed, mocked for his age and his uniform. Tonight had been different. Tonight, he had shown them the truth. He had shown them that worth is not determined by appearances, but by actions. A knock came at his door. When he opened it, a young intern from the company stood there, holding a small envelope. "Mr. Thompson," the intern said, nervously adjusting his tie. "The board asked me to deliver this to you. They'd like to formally apologize, and to invite you back. Not as an investor, but as an advisor." Harold smiled, taking the envelope but not opening it. "Tell them I'll think about it." The intern nodded, grateful just to be in his presence. As he left, Harold closed the door and chuckled softly. He didn't need the board's apology. What mattered was that the CEO's words, dripping with arrogance and prejudice, had been silenced by truth. What mattered was that the people in that room would never look at a janitor, or anyone they thought beneath them, the same way again. Sitting in his chair, Harold reflected on the irony. All it took to expose the hollowness of their arrogance was a simple reminder: respect costs nothing, but the lack of it can cost everything. The janitor had spoken, and the world had listened. And that's how Harold, the man dismissed as just a janitor, walked out with his dignity intact and left a corrupt CEO scrambling in the ruins of his arrogance. It's a reminder that true worth isn't measured by titles, youth, or the cut of a suit. It's measured by integrity, wisdom, and the choices we make when the spotlight isn't on us. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated? Told you were too old, too young, or not enough to matter? Share your story in the comments below. This space is more than just a channel. It's a community where your voice matters, where resilience is celebrated, and where every underdog gets the spotlight they deserve. If Harold's triumph inspired you, hit the like button, subscribe, and join us for more stories where the underestimated rise and the arrogant fall. Because in the end, it's not about who they think you are, it's about who you really are.